Hello, and welcome to Alta Live. This is the last Alta Live of the 2023 Alta Live season, as it were. My name is Beth Spotswood, and I am so excited to welcome you to today's conversation on the extraordinary popularity, the power, the artistic importance of the movie scores of composer John Williams. Joining me today is an Alta contributor, Tim Greiving. Tim wrote a really kind of fascinating article on Disney Hall and John Williams music for Alta's issue 25. So we're going to talk with Tim about how and why major symphonies celebrate cinema, scores from movies, the undeniable mass appeal of John Williams scores, and one of my favorite movies, the upcoming holiday Home Alone performances that are being done by both, in California at least, LAPhil and San Francisco Symphony. Before we begin, a bit about our guest. Tim Greiving is an arts journalist in LA who specializes in film and music. He regularly contributes to NPR, the LA Times, the Washington Post. His work has been published in the New York Times, Criterion, Variety, The Ringer, LA Magazine, Vulture, and of course, Alta Journal. He has written program notes for the LAPhil and Royal Albert Hall and liner notes for more than 100 soundtrack albums. He is currently writing the first English biography of John Williams, which will be published by Oxford University Press. Before we begin, a bit about Alta. Alta, if you're new to us, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. This is our current issue where you can find Tim's article. You can also find it online, and we will send you a link to that. If you're looking for the perfect holiday gift, Alta. If you want a back issue, go to Alta Online. We've got a store where you can buy our bookstore guide to bookstores of California and the West, back issues, hats, t-shirts. Upcoming issue, you want a sneak peek, folks? Baja. If you're a subscriber, this will be hitting your mailboxes next week. You can grab it at your favorite indie bookstore around California, the West, and beyond very soon. So please do consider us. We make a great last-minute holiday gift. Go to altaonline.com. This interview will be recorded. It will be emailed to you later this afternoon, along with links to Tim's article. I don't know, cool stuff about John Williams, where you can buy Alta, an invitation to tomorrow's California Book Club, featuring Caribbean Fragosa and her book, Eat the Mouth That Feeds You, and anything else we think is cool. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask your questions about John Williams, about Home Alone, anything else you want to talk about. And there's a chat. Let us know. Have I enabled it? Let us know where you're zooming in from. I am currently in rainy Novato, California. Tim, where are you today?
I'm in rainy Culver City, California.
Delighted for the rain in
Me
California.
too.
It's illegal to be in California and not acknowledge the rain and the happiness around that. Hey, South City, Redlands. All right, so Tim, first of all, can you tell us, of all of the John Williams movie scores, of which there are many, 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 and we will talk about lots of them, which was your gateway? Which is the score that had you kind of fall in love with the music of John Williams?
That's easy. It was Jurassic Park. I was 9 years old, and I did not see the movie when it came out. I guess, deemed too scary for me or something. But an older cousin of mine, we were visiting him in Orlando, where he lived, and he had the Jurassic Park soundtrack cassette tape in the van, my aunt's van, and I was looking at it and I was like, "What?" The concept of what this was, I didn't understand why the logo of the movie was on the logo of the Jeep in the movie because I hadn't seen it yet. That was confusing. But also, what is this music? And he explained there's this guy, John Williams, he writes music for films, and he explained that he did Star Wars and Indiana Jones and all these things that I already loved. So I realized, oh, I already liked that music. It was sort of the dawning of the awareness of who John Williams was and what a film score was in my little 9-year-old brain. So I went home, bought that tape, and then I became very quickly just a ravenous John Williams obsessive, which led to film music, my interest in film music generally, but it was always about John Williams for me.
Well, in terms of movie composers, symphonies, major kind of organizations like that, like LAPhil, which I know you've written about a ton, but also up here, San Francisco Symphony. I mean, and orchestras and symphonies all over the country and the world perform the music of John Williams. In fact, we were chatting before we went live. I saw him at the San Francisco Symphony do scores, kind of a mix up of his, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Jaws, etc. 30 years ago at San Francisco Symphony. Um, so these kind of big, very legitimate, very serious classical music organizations have seemed to welcome the music of John Williams along with the likes of Beethoven and Mozart and other of the great composers of history. Your article focuses a little bit about on the divide, the artistic divide between a score from Home Alone or even Schindler's List compared with a piece by Beethoven. Can you talk a little bit about where John Williams' work fits in the classical community?
Yeah, it's a very interesting big part of the story of John Williams and something I'm very interested in. Um, so film music had been going on for a couple decades before he got into it, but he's been in it for a long time. He started writing film scores in the late 50s, and he was playing piano for people that had been writing film music since the dawn of the talkies. So he played on scores by Dmitri Tiomkin and Alfred Newman and people like that who were like there at the beginning. So he's kind of like, as I say in the piece, he has had a front row seat to this. Um, and film music and film composers always had this kind of second class citizen reputation amongst the classical orchestras, administrations, critics, kind of the elite people in the classical world, the tastemakers, even musicians. They all looked down on film music and people who wrote music for film, specifically in America. It wasn't as true in some other places. Because in Russia, like Prokofiev wrote film scores, Shostakovich wrote film scores, and they didn't see it as some like a secondary lesser art form. But for some reason in Hollywood, it was always seen as kind of a sellout. It's commercial music. It's second rate. And most of it's kind of just rip off classical kind of hackery anyway. So there was always this attitude of snobbery from the classical side to just film music in general. So John Williams coming into that world inherited the same kind of status in some people's minds. And as soon as he became successful, really starting with Jaws and then even more so with Star Wars, he became an internationally known figure. His music, Star Wars was the best-selling non-pop record of all time. So it was like everybody had a copy of the Star Wars soundtrack. And as soon as he became really successful and famous, he sort of became a target from the classical people of saying he's just ripping off a holes. He's just ripping off all these classical. That's been an attitude and an opinion about John Williams that has persisted over the years, especially from classical people who just are like, hey, that piece of music from Star Wars sounds just like the planets or whatever. They'll point out these things and kind of label him as a plagiarist.
Yeah.
So that overlaps with this general attitude about film music. And then of course, as he starts to get invitations to conduct, Ernest Fleischman, who was the head of the LAPhil back in the 70s, was very like forward thinking. He wanted John Williams to be involved at the Hollywood Bowl with the LAPhil. He wanted to get Star Wars out there in public concerts. So there was an open-mindedness there and a lack of snobbery, but then there was resistance from these other forces of the classical critics who attended these concerts, or even some of the musicians, or even maybe audiences thinking, this music doesn't belong. It was okay at the Hollywood Bowl because that's pops, that's for the kids, that's for, the Beatles or whatever. It's okay there, but it's not okay in our hallowed hall of serious art music. And so that tension was there from the beginning, not of his career, but of his success as like as a global kind of superstar composer in the 70s.
Do you think that his music was performed by organizations like that early on to sell tickets to get butts in seats, or because it was, at least some of the people in charge took the music seriously as quality pieces of artwork, or a combination of both? It was certainly the first time I ever went to the symphony was to see John Williams. And so, I think there's something to be said for the commercial, kid-friendly, family, pop-friendly component to his work.
I think it was a combination of both from the beginning. I mean, there's no denying it sells tickets, and it sells a lot of tickets. The early Star Wars concerts, which went all around the country after the LAPhil did it at the Bowl, they sold a lot of tickets. So people loved going out to hear it. And of course, like artistic administrations, orchestras are going to take notice of that this is something that's going to, bring in a lot of money. And the LAPhil was always pretty smart about using the Hollywood Bowl and popular music, whether it was popular classical pieces or pop acts, to generate all the revenue that they needed to then kind of do a little bit more daring or experimental programming during the regular season. So they've always had this interesting and very business savvy kind of relationship with the Bowl, bringing in all this money because it seats a lot of people, but also you're just putting on these popular acts, and then you can do more interesting things or more, experimental things, more serious things during the fall and spring season. But I do think Ernest Fleischman, even Zubin Mehta, who was the music director at the time, they weren't just slumming it. They weren't saying like, okay, we'll do this thing that we find creatively reprehensible, but we know it'll sell a lot of money. I think they actually thought, no, this is quality music. This is a good composer, and it's popular. So it's kind of a win-win.
I should point out that LAPhil is doing Home Alone on the 22nd and 23rd. I'm going to send you links to all of this. Both LAPhil and SF Symphony wanted to try and participate in this. They are all in rehearsals right now for a number of end of year performances coming up. But the San Francisco Symphony is doing it in their, regular Davies Symphony Hall. But they are doing it. This is, I'm trying to figure out how to word this question. Sometimes when John Williams performs a show, he'll do all music, not just his film scores, but include people who've composed others. Other times, for example, with the Home Alone screenings, it's a screening of the movie on a big screen with the orchestra or the symphony musicians performing the musical parts, or at least the classical music parts. As we know, Home Alone has lots of rock music, classic Christmas songs like that, but a very memorable score as well. How does that, can you talk a little bit about the difference between those? Does John Williams feel like does it lessen the experience to have a movie screened while people are, performing his music? Does he prefer to do his own, have a full show of just music? They're kind of two different ways that his music is performed.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I think he totally loves and supports and is behind these we call them live to picture concerts, where you have the film and you have the orchestra playing the score live to the film. He was one of the first people to really do it, actually. When ET celebrated its 20th anniversary in 2002, John Williams conducted the whole score live to the movie. And that was one of the very first instances of this thing happening. So he kind of was pioneering that. I mean, I think recognizing that these scores were written to go with the film, to accompany scenes, images, story, dialogue, it makes sense to present, if you're going to present the music, it makes sense to present it with the movie. And it's really fun to do the whole movie with the whole score and not just little clips, because they've been doing that for a long time. The Hollywood Bowl always did kind of clip accompaniment type things for decades. But so he supports this. But yes, then it's different than just going to hear a concert and just paying attention to the music.
Yeah.
And I'm of different minds with this myself, because I of course love these scores and I like the experience of hearing them live with a great orchestra, with a big audience. Part of the joy of these is seeing something at the Hollywood Bowl. You're seeing a movie with 17,000 people. It's the communal experience of seeing a movie, especially a beloved movie that you know in and out, and seeing it with all these people who are laughing or gasping or crying or responding to the film at the same time, and have a live orchestra there. It's a magical way to experience a movie that's so different than even going to like the local theater. But I also feel like, is this perpetuating the idea that film music is it's a different like animal than classical music, serious music. We need the images to go with it for it to be sort of palatable or for it to make sense. Or and I'm of the mind that this music, the best of this music, belongs in the concert hall without any images by itself next to the greats. And I do worry. I wonder if this live to picture phenomenon, which has been great for film music and for orchestras selling tickets and bringing in a new audience, if it's still kind of keeping that dividing line kind of, strong. I don't know. We're still figuring this out.
I'm curious as a very the guy who's literally writing the book on John Williams, which pieces of his, which film scores of his do you think deserve to be up there just as independent, beautiful, important pieces of music standing alone?
I could list so many, but E.T. belongs up there. Raiders of the Lost Ark belongs up there. Schindler's List. Lesser known ones like Empire of the Sun. My favorite score of his of all time, AI, Steven Spielberg film.
Really?
Yeah. But I mean, there's kids ones like Hook and Harry Potter, absolutely, or more serious dramatic ones. He's done so many historical, like Lincoln. I mean,
I didn't
I
realize he did The Patriot,
oh yeah,
which is not the greatest movie ever, but has a fabulous, fabulous score.
fantastic. He scored a lot of important episodes of American history, like many different wars, many different presidents. Uh,
Right.
but the thing about John Williams is he takes every assignment very seriously.
So
He
talk a little,
never,
can you tell us just about his process? Because I noticed a few minutes ago you called him John and then caught yourself and was like
oops.
Williams. We should point out that Tim is really actively, regularly spending time interviewing John Williams for this biography. So you're getting to know him
Hmm.
as well as a biographer can, I guess. But can you tell us a little bit about that process? As Mary Melton, our editor at large in LA, points out, Jaws. I mean, he created the sound of a shark coming to get you.
Hmm.
What's his process like when he's working uh, with anyone? But I always think of him with Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, no, they've been the longest collaborators in 50 years. And yeah, so yeah, his process is he watches the film, typically like a rough cut of the film first. He doesn't like to read the script. He might have a conversation with the director, but he likes to have a very guttural, immediate response to the film. He feels like a script might give him different ideas of what it's going to look like or what it's going to feel like. He wants to see the film for the first time like the audience would see it. And so he takes his
Silent.
well, sometimes it's silent, and sometimes it's what we call a temp track, which is a temporary soundtrack cobbled together from other film scores or classical pieces.
Really?
A lot of editors like to edit with music because it just makes sense rhythmically, and they also want to get a sense of how the scene's supposed to feel, or if they need to preview it for executives or for a preview audience, it needs music to kind of make sense. So most films have this temp track in, and John Williams will see some of these movies with the temp track just as kind of a guide, like a reference point for here's where I was thinking music should come in. Here's the kind of mood I wanted it to have, that kind of stuff. It's just easier to hear the ideas rather than try to explain them verbally. So he'll take that as a kind of a reference. He'll take what the director says. Sometimes the director has a really strong idea of what kind of music they want or what instruments or whatever. Or they'll say, I really love this classical piece. Can you do something kind of like that? He'll go away and he'll just take one scene at a time. He works at a piano and at just like a writing desk. A lot of times he's just writing, he uses pencil and paper still. He's just writing notes quietly in his office or his house, and he's got the scene. He knows how many minutes of music it needs, how many minutes, how many seconds. He uses a stopwatch to kind of figure out how long the music will take to fit the scene. He developed this method in the 50s, which is how they were doing it, and he never really evolved. He doesn't evolved. He's the most evolved composer there is, but in sense of technology, he doesn't own a computer. He doesn't own a cell phone. He's very old school, but he just
Also
he
91.
he is 91. But it's just his method is very pure in a way. It's just he he takes the needs of the scene. He knows it needs to be, exultant or funny or sad or whatever the kind of feeling is. He knows it needs to kind of hit these certain actions. Some scores are very choreographed to what you're seeing on the screen. So you need to hit this moment in the music when the person enters the door or when they're running across the ice or whatever it is. And he might musically need to kind of choreograph to the action, especially if it's an action scene. Or like, Home Alone's a great example of very kind of almost cartoonish kind of scoring where he's accenting and commenting on these little visual cues or funny moments with the music. So it's very highly synchronized music. It's really impressive that he can write a cue or a score that hits all these moments on the screen perfectly. And when you listen to it, it sounds like a piece of music that has its own kind of like flow and logic to it. And it's really pretty, or it's just really nice to listen to. He is such a master at somehow doing both at the same time and making it seem kind of effortless. Um, I could go on, but that's generally how he works.
That's an extraordinary way to work. I mean, even for like the title sequences, when you think of Jurassic Park, I mean, or for Jaws, but with Jurassic Park, I was telling Tim before we began that my 5-year-old son loves the score. He loves the movie and now he listens to the score. And he creates this sense of wonder and the creation of life and the tropical island where dinosaurs exist in an opening 3-minute sequence of music that also seems to the sound, the vibe, for lack of a better word, continues throughout the movie from the exciting sequences. People are getting eaten by dinosaurs, people are running away to magic, oh my God, look, it's the real brontosaurus. That it's also cohesive and goes together so magically. I'm surprised that he's sitting there with a stopwatch and a pen and paper just trying to get the timing right.
It's amazing because nowadays composers can just pull up the scene on their computer and they're working in the software and they're constantly like checking to see if things sync up properly. So it's still a difficult art, but technology's made it a lot easier. And most modern scores don't worry about hitting the kind of as choreographed as a lot of John Williams scores are. So they're less worried about hitting these certain moments. It can kind of just do its own thing. So what he does is really a distinct art that a lot of classical composers would really struggle with. It's very difficult. A lot of classical composers avoided scoring films or did one like Leonard Bernstein and never did one again. And you could say, well, it's because they thought it was beneath them or they didn't want to sell out. But you could also say it was too difficult. Like it's a very collaborative art form. You're working with the director. You've got all these other I don't know what is a thumbs up. It knows. You kind of have to subjugate your ego a little bit to work with other people and kind of serve the director's ideas for what the film should be. But also, it's hard. It's hard to write music that serves the picture in all the ways it's supposed to and hits all the beats and still sounds like music and still feels like music. And John Williams is one of the best. I mean, I think he's the best who ever did it and will ever do it. But it's a rarefied class of composers who could do what he does, and I'm including classical people because Mozart didn't have to worry about that kind of stuff.
I want to ask the audience if you could pop your favorite John Williams score in the comments. Well, I asked him, what's he like? Well, I mean, he's, clearly you consider him an artistic and musical genius. What's it like hanging out with him and asking him about his career?
I mean, it's amazing for someone who's like basically worshipped him since I was a little boy. It's surreal for me. He has this kind of I think he has this persona of like a grandfatherly or of uncle-like figure. He's kind of Yo-Yo Ma. I interviewed Yo-Yo Ma about him, and he said he's kind of like Santa Claus's brother. He's like this wise, kind, bearded man with a twinkle in his eye, and like getting to know him as much as I have, for what it's worth, it just kind of lived up to that persona. He's just kindly, he's very intelligent, he's extremely well read. He's constantly asking me if I know what a word means or if I know who a person is, and I'm like, no, and he's like, well, you should know who that is. But his mind is gigantic, but he's not arrogant about it. He just knows a lot. But he's just, he's sitting there in kind of this essentially a rocking chair in his office. And at times it feels like I'm sitting with my grandfather. Like it's just this nice chat with a really nice older man. But then other times you're like, I'm sitting next to the piano where he wrote Jurassic Park on, and there's a picture of him and Barack Obama or something. So you're kind of torn between he's so normal, he's so down to earth, he's so humble, genuinely humble, he's so easily accessible, and yet he's influenced foreign policy or written some of the masterpieces of the 20th century. It's very strange.
Well, it's extraordinary. He was also, I should point out, the love theme from Superman was my wedding song, which is a John Williams.
Good
Um,
choice.
yeah, folks are saying Schindler's List is a big one, makes people cry. Raiders, The Terminal. I'm curious about, is he talking at all? I mean, I'm sure he must be. How did his collaboration with Steven Spielberg he's collaborated with many, many, many directors, but he's perhaps most famous for his collaborations with Steven Spielberg. How did that begin? And what's their relationship like?
It's a fun story actually, because Spielberg is like 15 years younger than John Williams. And most people don't think of John Williams. They don't really know much about John Williams prior to Jaws. Like, sort of starts with Jaws and on. They think, who was John Williams before that? Who cares? He had this really substantial career scoring films, making records, playing piano, playing jazz, doing all these things before he ever met Spielberg. So he was this established, you know, career composer. Spielberg was a movie nerd, like the biggest movie nerd and a film score dork like me, collecting film soundtracks since he was a little kid. So he had all these old film soundtracks, and that he fell in love with old Hollywood movie music. That's partly why his films are scored in kind of an old-fashioned way. But he was a young screenwriter in his late teens, and he was writing a screenplay that he was developing. And he had bought this John Williams soundtrack. It was for a movie called The Reivers with Steve McQueen from 1969. Most people, it's based on a William Faulkner book, but it's pretty obscure. And it's this great kind of folk Americana, Stephen Collins Foster, really melodic score that John Williams wrote. It's beautiful and it's very tuneful and it's very old fashioned. And Steven Spielberg listened to this while he was writing the screenplay. He said he listened to it so many times he wore out the LP and he had to buy another one. And he said, if I ever get to direct a feature film, I want this guy to score it. So he gets his first chance for a movie called The Sugarland Express, and he arranges for a lunch with this John Williams. And this little nerdy, like young, early 20s Steven Spielberg is with this 40-year-old like genius. And Steven Spielberg starts humming like obscure themes from John Williams's old scores, just like total nerd. Like I can so relate to it. But they hit it off. And when John Williams saw a cut of the Sugarland Express, he realized this guy is really good. He's a really good director and he knows music. He loves music. And they just instantly, and it really was cemented on Jaws, obviously, because the score for Jaws, as great as every element of that movie is, the score for Jaws is what makes that film scary, haunting, memorable, effective. The music is so powerful and so important in that film. And they were just two, stars on the rise together at that point. But it's a beautiful collaboration.
I mean, you can't see a shark ever without going dun it, dun it, dun it, dun it, dun it. It's it's
Yeah.
it's it's a part of our cultural lexicon. All right, as promised, can we talk a little bit about the score from Home Alone? I realize that there is the Schindler's List, there is Raiders, there's Star Wars, but I wore my you're what the French call les incompetents sweatshirt. Home Alone is a Spotswood family year-round favorite. Can you offer kind of any insight into how he did that? That was not a collaboration with Steven Spielberg, but rather Chris Columbus, who he did the Harry Potter movies with as well. What can you tell us, if anything, about Home Alone?
Well, first of all, I love the score for Home Alone. It's one of the best. It's so good. And it's a great example of one thing that John Williams does consistently, which is he takes material that other people might think is cheap or kiddie or corny, and he elevates it. He gives it a nobility and a seriousness. And he was never approached to score Home Alone because it was a lowish budget movie. Chris Columbus is basically a first-time director. It's basically like a live action cartoon. It's like a
It
Roadrunner
is, yes.
cartoon. It's about a little kid like setting booby traps for these dumb burglars and then getting smacked in the face with paint cans and stuff. So it was never like, oh, we should go to John Williams with this. And so they hired a
Oscar
different
winner John Williams.
I know. They never even thought of him. So they hired a different composer. There was a composer named Bruce Broughton attached to this movie. But then there was a conflict where he was asked to do a Disney animated movie, and he's like, "I'm going to do that instead."
What
I
movie?
think, and Rescuers Down Under was the movie. It's a good score actually.
Right.
But he was like, eh. And so they had this gap, and like they didn't know what to do. And then Chris Columbus gets a call that says, "Hey, John Williams is interested in scoring Home Alone." John Williams somehow heard about this movie, and he asked if he could score it. So it's a very interesting, like he saw something in this movie that even Chris Columbus said he didn't see. John Williams has called it Dickensian, and he found it very charming. And as I see it, he saw it as an opportunity to write a all-time Christmas film score and two original Christmas carols. No one asked him to do that, but he was like, I can write two, not just one, but two original Christmas carols and this like glorious, like nostalgic, emotional, gorgeous, and sometimes comedic Christmas score. I think he saw it as a great opportunity and he saw potential in the film and he just poured his heart into it and he gave it every bit of seriousness and attentiveness and melody that he would give any serious kind of dramatic movie. And I believe that the score is what makes it like an all-time classic. It's why people have such an emotional relationship to it. It's funny and it's sweet, but it's the score that makes it feel so grounded and heartwarming and noble. I mean, he gives it this nobility that was no one even Chris Columbus didn't see it as a noble thing, but John Williams saw what it had and he gave it that, which I think is so admirable and so interesting.
What an amazing backstory to how the score from Home Alone came to be. Who
Yeah.
knew? I have so many questions, and I realize that we need to wrap this up. It's so fun to hear you talk about this because you are just waist deep in John Williams and his work. Um, who else are you interviewing for this book, and what's that like?
I mean, I've tried to interview every director he's worked with, and I recently interviewed Steven Spielberg, but I interviewed Chris Columbus and Oliver Stone, and before he died, Richard Donner, who did Superman. Everyone I could get to. I've interviewed a lot of musicians, the studio musicians who play on a lot of his scores, people at the London Symphony who played on a lot of his scores, but people like Yo-Yo Ma, Itzhak
What do
Perlman.
musicians think of him?
Oh, they adore him. But one musician said when it's a John Williams session, everybody sits up a little straighter because
Wow.
they want to make him proud. He has this kind of a standard of excellence. He's not intimidating. They're not scared of him, but they just know he wants it to be excellent, and they all want to do so well for him. They adore him, like to a person. Musicians love him, and they love playing his music because it's always interesting. It's never just like sustaining a note or just playing the same kind of rhythmic idea over and over again. It's really dynamic, fun music, and every section of the orchestra has something to do, which is not true for all film music. So they love playing his music. But I've talked to friends, family, somebody he went to high school with, people like that. So I've tried to talk to everybody I could possibly think of for the book.
Anne asks, Tim, I'd like to take a class on film scores and the use of music in movies. Do you teach such a class? Do you teach at USC?
I do. I teach a class on film music history at USC.
Um, is there, for those of us that don't go to USC, are there such classes available? Are you going to do a master class in this one day?
I don't know. I'd be open to something like that. Film music history, film music appreciation. There are classes like that at different schools. There's a lot of schools that now offer degrees in film scoring. But if you're not looking to like enroll and become a film composer yourself, I don't know. I don't know what's on offer out there, but there are books about film music history. I would love to take my the film music appreciation element of my class and get it out to like a broader audience, but thus far I don't know. I don't know what to do that.
Sorry, Anne. Lynn asks, just wondering, do you think his legacy will be carried on via AI, artificial intelligence? What does he think of AI?
We haven't talked about it really. I don't know that. I mean, he's very smart, but it's such a technology like out there kind of concept that I'm not sure he. I'm sure he's read about it. He reads about it a lot, but it hasn't come up. But I don't know. I'm sure he's worried about the future of orchestral music, but AI, I'm not sure.
Can you tell us just what is one thing? If John Williams were here and I had that moxie, I would ask him, does he have like what would surprise us about John Williams? Does he love Taylor Swift? Does he, I don't know, watch The Golden Bachelor? Like, what would we be surprised? I realize that he's a genius and that he's very well read and he doesn't have a computer, but what might surprise us to learn about world famous, beloved composer John Williams?
Yeah, not the Golden Bachelor. He doesn't watch. Yeah, this is interesting. He doesn't watch a lot of movies. He's not really that. He's not really a big fan of movies. So
Really?
yeah.
Okay, well,
Um,
that in and of itself is he's not really a big fan of movies.
he loves what he does, but he doesn't just go watch movies for fun, and he never really has. It's just not his. He'd rather read, or he'd rather read music. He reads music like he'll read a Beethoven score without listening to it and just read it like a book. That's one of his forms of recreation is just reading music because he can hear it in his head.
Wow. And so he's almost 92, and you said he's doing great.
He's doing great. He's still conducting. I went and saw him conduct in Japan back in September, and he's conducting at Carnegie Hall in February with Yo-Yo Ma, and he's writing a piano concerto. He writes music every day.
Wow, this is incredible. All right, well, I feel like all of us will leave this and at some point in the next couple of days, listen to a John Williams movie score with kind of a new ears, as it were. Tim Greiving, thank you so much for taking the time to do this in the middle of your day, in the middle of the wild holiday season. I am so grateful. I loved your article. We will send everyone a link to The Forces with Him, Tim's article in the issue 25 of Alta Journal. Again, folks, this is the last episode of Alta Live. We'll be back. We're taking 2 weeks off. We will be back January 10th with Mysterious Buried Treasures of Baja California. So join us for that conversation. But until then, listen to the Home Alone soundtrack, any other John Williams scores you love. And Tim, thank you so much. Please write more for Alta.
I will, and thank you. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks, guys. Bye.